There? Great. Good. Good. I was thinking that Monty Python saying, and now for something completely different. Before I jump into the material, a couple of humorous and informational notes. When I was getting on my flight Tuesday morning, my connection Salt Lake City, the pilot was in the galley there, so I said, "I'm getting a lot of questions about MAX 8s." And he said, "Don't worry about it. Delta buys the cheaper planes." So we don't own any of those expensive MAX 8s. You're safe. So I felt good for the rest of the time on the flight. But one comment about the scandal that's going on now about college admissions. There, I spent 6 years as a full-time academic, and 2 of those years were on the admissions committee. What's going on now is no big deal, and don't get overly excited about it. College admissions is rigged from the start, and it has very little to do with objective performance. Okay, when I was on the admissions committee, I represented the faculty, the dean's office, the president's office, etc. We got literally a matrix of holes to fill with various people with various backgrounds. And that's how students are judged. Okay? And it's the opposite of what you think. So if you are a smart Jew and a smart Asian, it's negative. You lose points. Okay? If you are a gang member from Brooklyn, you gain points. Right? And if your last name matches the names on most of the buildings on the campus, you will get in. And you will get in unless you paddle bottoming. You will otherwise you will get in. So this is a tip of the iceberg. People buying into universities and colleges right now. Colleges look for the weirdest students possible because of the pressure groups that are there. So if you're a handicapped Samoan woman who's homeless in New York, you're in. And I kid you not. So all we did was fill holes in the matrix. And that's what college admissions is about. Don't kid yourself. That's why students better have a whole real list of possibilities, because if they're real smart and high achievers, it will work against them, particularly if they come from an overrepresented ethnic group. Okay, now you may say it was outrageous, it's terrible. If that quota system is not used, 75% of an entry class would be smart Jews and smart Asians. Right? And if you're a smart Jew or smart Asian, under the current system, you're pissed off, right? And you're filing suits. There are innumerable suits now, again, anti-discrimination suits from the Asian community. They are vigorously discriminated against, right? So don't get overly excited about what you're seeing in the news now. It's much ado about nothing. Okay, let's talk about recruiting. Hopefully the same standards are not used in typical recruiting. Recruiting in American business is at a horrendously bad level. Right now, if you use the current criteria for recruiting now, you'd be better off with a dartboard. American companies are doing a great job of recruiting people for the 1960s and the 1970s. It has nothing to do with the current culture at all. And just a quick side note, I have a dual background. I was first a cultural historian at the doctoral level, taught it for 6 years in 2 universities. Then I was masochistic enough to go back to school and become a psychotherapist. So I have a big picture of culture and the micro picture of psychotherapy individuals. And those two, the interplay between those two has always fascinated me. So my work with corporations is essentially bringing together professional performance with personality issues. So what is it about you personally that feeds successful performance? And what is it about you personally that gets in the way of your performance? Could I get, oh, is this good? Got some water here?
Not sure who that is. I'll get you one later.
I'm from a generation where I'm not a germ freak or a germ freak. So I don't get overly upset by
well, it could be mine, so you shouldn't be worried.
Okay, thank you. So what we need now, and I won't give you the whole background at all, if you pick up the business literature now, it's all about soft skills. What we need in the workforce, ironically because of information, are people with soft skills. What are soft skills? Okay? They are relationship building. We need people who build relationships quickly and deeply. We need people who create conflict and manage it well. We need people who confront tough issues, painful issues, and don't go into denial. That's what we need. That's not who we're interviewing. Right? We have a paucity of soft skills in the culture right now. Right? So number one, what most companies are looking for is not in the labor market in any great degree of plenty. They're just not out there. So you have to hire people who can be changed and who are willing to learn new ways of operating in the world. So we have a real crisis as a result of that. What we're looking for is by and large not there. So what caused this massive change? Okay. I'll give you a little history lesson. What we're dealing with now is a result of the damage done to the culture by World War II. Okay. As distant as that seems, it impacts everything that goes on right now. What happened as a result of World War II? A whole generation of people, particularly men, were traumatized by an experience, horrendous experiences, all over the world. My father was in the war in the Pacific Theater. He spent 4 to 5 years putting people's faces back together. Right. He spent some time on Guadalcanal, the worst American casualties in the history of any war. Slaughters to a degree you cannot imagine. The only thing he ever told a story about was the fact that GIs on Guadalcanal slept with their guns next to them, not because of the enemy, but because of the rats. There were more casualties from the rats on Guadalcanal were the size of dogs. So you can imagine, many GIs died of rat bites there. He had friends, lost many friends. He had friends who liberated concentration camps in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And we're never the same as a result of that. So what does that matter? What's the whole point of that? That produced a generation of people who came home and had no opportunity to grieve their experience. Right? And instead of grieving their experience, they built lives of denial around what they had been through. And part of that denial was to try to be happy about everything and make everything positive. Right? Now you could say war damages everybody. Vietnam damaged people. You know what the difference was after World War II? There was zero help for people. Nobody paid any attention at all. You know, Vietnam was terrible, did a lot of damage, but there was help for people in coping with that. So what did that result in? It resulted in men coming back who were, by and large, emotionally unavailable to their children. Right? I can do a talk with 500 CEOs, and I'll say, how many of you had an emotionally unavailable father? Every hand in the room goes up. Right? There's men with little capacity to access their feelings. Right? So what they do with their families, decided we're going to all be happy to deal with these issues. Okay? And a whole generation of men also came back to children that they had fathered that they didn't know. I didn't meet my father until I was 5 years old. Right? So the first 5 years I was raised by my mother and 2 grandmothers. My father came back and he was an instant father. He had no idea what to do, how to connect. I had no idea how to relate to this man who walked into my house as a stranger and supposed to be my father. all of that produced a number of things, one of which was people struggled to access any feelings and taught their children that what they did was important, not what they felt. Now, why is that super important? Because we're in a culture of rapid change. What does rapid change mean? That means rapid loss. One of the concepts, if you take away nothing else from my talk, is that all change is loss. Understand that. There is no change without loss. Like, what's lost in every change? What's lost is what you're familiar with. Right? And ironically, the more successful you are, the more loss there'll be in your life. Successful people have more loss than mediocre people. In fact, mediocrity is a buffer against loss. You know why people stay in crappy relationships and work in crappy companies year after year? There's very little loss. Think about that. I run into people regularly who say, boy, am I glad you're here. This place is a zoo. It is terrible. It's one of the worst places to work. How long have you been working here? Oh shit, I've been here 19 years. It's just horrendous. Okay? Well, why are you still here? Because it minimizes losses. And much of the public trades terrible conditions for minimal loss. So understand that we need people who can regularly deal with loss, and we're not producing them in the culture. Right? So what we are doing at this point is rewarding people for what they do. And one of the points I make with my clients is you better be hiring people for who they are, not what they know. You can teach them what you need them to know. You can't remake who they are. You can help them change. But this is really an important point. If you're recruiting people, you better shift your recruiting to an analysis of who these people fundamentally are, not the skills they bring to the table. You can be highly skilled and impossible to work with. Right? And that's about who they are. So we produce a lot of people who think life is about doing, not about feeling. Right? And we are now in a point where you need to access those feelings to deal with the constant loss that's bringing about change. Second thing that was a result of the World War II experience is we redefined parenting in America. And it went from producing children who were self-caring and understood they needed to work their way up the ladder and understood that life was not a bowl of cherries, to raising children to be happy. Okay? And it's been devastating in our culture. Raising children is not about making them happy. It's about growing them. Okay? And now we have a culture. You know why we have so much drug abuse? Okay? You know what the definition of a person is who needs to be happy all the time? They're called addicts. Okay? And that's why we have massive addiction. We have sold people a bill of goods. That life is about being happy all the time. Okay? If you need to be happy all the time and you're not, then you take drugs. And that's one of the problems we have massively in our culture. But we have a whole bunch of people, and we're still raising kids to be happy. And the other thing that's wrong with that is they don't know how to deal with one of the key issues in a high change culture, and that is disappointment. If you deprive people of knowing how to deal with disappointment, you deprive them of the ability of dealing with change. People can't be disappointed or resistant to change. And this is a real crisis, and it's a crisis in parenting. I do a lot of lectures, my wife and I do a lot of work with corporations around people who are still raising children. Okay? And right now we are patently dishonest in raising children. We don't tell them the truth. Okay? Just a simple example of that. Why do children need to go to bed at night? You get the hell away so parents can have some adult time. Not because they need sleep and nourishment and all that crap. Okay, so when our kids, when it was time for them to go to bed, you know, we said to our kids, we're through with dealing with you. Time to exit and go up to your rooms. And you know what? We really don't give a shit if you go to sleep or stay up all night. That's your choice. And if you stay up all night and you're miserable in the morning, deal with it. That's a choice you made. So I remember one of our boys at one point, as he got older, he said, you just want to get rid of us at night, don't you? We said, you bet your ass. That's a very insightful thing that you discovered. Okay? So that was one of the places where we had to just be honest with it. Okay? And all this stuff about children sleep and this obsession with what our children eat is unbelievable in our culture. Okay? You know, we told our kids, here's dinner, here's the food. You eat it. There's no special diet for you. If you don't want to eat it, you won't eat. Right? And you know what? Kids, no middle-class kid in America is going to die of malnutrition or starvation. Right? They will get what they need. And our own kids, raising grandkids, they frustrate us at times because they run around like lunatics making special food. I think, what in the hell are you doing? Or they worry about, all our grandson wants to do, all our son wants to do is eat peanut butter all the time. Shit, let him eat peanut butter all the time. No, when he gets tired of it, he'll eat something else. The obsession with things like that is preposterous. Okay? Another example of dishonesty, our middle son, as he was gotten into high school, didn't think he wanted to do any chores. So I'd say, time to take out David, time to take out the garbage. Okay, we'd go back and forth, I'll take it out, it would sit there. After a while, I'd have to say, you know, what century are you going to take the garbage out? So one day, in the foyer of the house, we had a critical exchange. And he said, taking out the garbage sucks. I said, of course it sucks. That's why you're doing it. No, if it didn't suck, I'd do it. So you take out the garbage, and I make the mortgage payment. Anytime you want to switch, cool with me. But understand, you get some sucky jobs. Yeah. Now, all of this has devolved into a workforce that is incapable of dealing with disappointment. If people need any skill in this culture, it's understanding that disappointment is critical to growth. No one grows because everything is great. Okay? The catalyst for growth is disappointment and upsetness. And if it's not there, there's no growth. But we are producing children, young people, adolescents, with little and no capacity to deal with disappointment. And that's tragic. That makes them resistant to change, and ultimately it makes them mediocre. I can't tell you how many of my clients give a young college graduate off an MBA their first performance evaluation, and they completely melt down. This is the first time they have heard, son, you do a crappy job. And you know what? If it doesn't change, you won't be here. And many, many of those young men and women do not come back to work the next day. That's how devastating it is to hear you are disappointed. And it is very, very sad to see that again and again. I can't stress this enough. If you cannot deal with disappointment, you cannot grow. It's an absolutely essential skill, and that's what we need to be looking for in recruiting people. So understand that. If you have any questions about that concept, it's poorly misunderstood by people. It's an absolute necessity. Okay. So what does it have to do with recruiting? Well, number one has to do with this fact. The only thing that will help you do better recruiting is an intensive interview. Forget about recommendations. Forget about resumes. They are useless. absolutely useless. We've done studies of resumes, and it's shocking what we find. Gallup does a study every year. You know what we find about resumes? 65% of the information is what politicians call misrepresentations, and what real people call lies. Okay? There are fraudulencies on resumes, full of it at all. And you know what else is wrong with them? It just tells you what people did, not why they did anything in their life. The only thing important about a resume is, does it look like English, or as one of my sons says, Angrish? The lack of writing skills is appalling. And you know what we find? If you can't write well, you are a poor performer. Very interesting. So we get rid of resumes entirely, and don't even spend time looking at it. So clients say to me then, what do we replace it with? How do we do preliminary screening without a resume? I have a job, 50 people applied for it. What do? Here's what you do. Tell them to send you a one-page statement with 2 paragraphs. First paragraph is, what were the most positive decisions you've made in your life? Okay? Write out what it is and why you made that decision. Second paragraph, what were the worst decisions you made in your life and why did you make them? That's it. You get 1 page, and we will stop reading at the end of 1 page. One other thing we found real helpful, if you can't say what you want to say in 1 page, then you don't understand it. Right? There's a great acronym we developed. Okay, and let me get this straight. TLNR. TLNR. Too long, never read. Right. And keep that in mind. So we tell people who apply for a job, send us this 1-page statement, 2 paragraphs. That eliminates half the people right away. Right? You know why? They're embarrassed about their writing, or they've never made any decisions in their life to write about. That is immediately a screener right there. So if you want to find out just right away who you ought to be talking to, have them do a writing sample. It's one of the best things possible to discriminate. Now, what about the interview? A good job interview is uncomfortable, challenging, full of feedback, and is interactive. The typical interview is a checklist of questions in which you find out nothing. Okay, important point here, don't ever ask anyone a single question and move on. A single question is a hostile gesture. Really need to understand that. If I ask you one question and don't follow up, what's the message? What's the unstated message? Think about that. I don't really give a shit about the response anyway. Don't ask people single questions and then move right on. You ask someone a question in an interview, you better be able to drill down and follow up. If you don't drill down and follow up, don't ask the question in the first place. So it's a real important point. The interview is not to be comfortable. It is not to be pleasant. It is to be challenging as hell. Why? You're not hiring people to do safe, easy work. So if they can't survive a tough interview, why the hell do you think they can survive the job? Right. So, and really important point, relationship, the interviews are about the candidate's ability to establish a relationship quickly. In a high change culture, we do not have the time to get to know people. You know, I grew up with this whole nostrum about, well, you know, it takes time to get to know people. If it takes you time to get to know people, you won't know many. You better know how to connect quickly with people and immediately drive it deeper or abandon it. But that's a skill we need and should be part of an interview. So an interview has to have challenges in it. Absolutely has to have challenges. When we do interviews, we give people feedback during the interview all the time. When I've interviewed people a number of times, and I say to them, is there someone else in the room? And they said, well, why do you ask me? Because you're looking over my shoulder. It's very irritating. Okay? Why can't you look me in the eye when we're talking? I want to see how people respond to that challenge. Right? And I don't want a nonsense thing like, well, no, I was really looking at you. You know what I say then? I can deal with a lot of things, but I can't deal with people who lie to me. So don't do that again. I ask people what difficult stuff they've been through. I remember interviewing a CEO candidate, and when I asked about difficult stuff, he said, I lost my mother to cancer when I was 5. My father died at 8 in a car crash. Wow. How did that impact your life? Well, I learned to be independent. Anything else you want to know? Okay, that ended the interview right there. Right? You know why? There was no feeling whatsoever in that response. That person would be a nightmare to manage. And another thing about interviews, when it's clear you've got an inappropriate candidate, end it right away and move on. Don't waste your time with totally inappropriate people. I mean, I have people who say, well, can you ask me that kind of question? That's the end of the interview. Right? You understand why? That's someone looking for a lawsuit, not a job. So anyone who asks you, if you can ask them that question, look out. That's trouble. There are clear questions dictated by knee-jerk liberal laws you can't ask people. I get that. We have a handbook, it lists all those questions. But you've got to be criminally stupid to ask anyone those questions anyway. I mean, can you imagine asking someone, what's your race? Who would ask them that stupid question anyway? Are you planning to have children? What does your husband do? No, sir. You don't need to ask those questions. I will give you some questions that will give you everything you need to know about a person's personal life, right? Without asking any prohibited questions at all. You don't need to go there. Right? So we are looking for people in interview who have experienced disappointment and loss and learned from their life experience. This is really critical. Right? I am not interested in what you did in your life. I'm interested in what you learned from it about yourself. That's the key issue. If you learn very little from your life experience, I don't want you working for me. Because every time we need to make significant change, you're going to buck it. Because you don't like to learn from what's happened to you. I'll give you some example. Years and years ago, and I'm still in touch with this person, we interviewed a person in a financial services firm for a job as a financial services rep. Right? He grew up in rural Kansas in a small town. His house burned down when he was in middle school, I think. They had no insurance. His mother had to go to work as a cleaning lady. His father became alcoholic and abandoned the family. And from the time he was in high school till the time he graduated from college, he worked full time. Now, what did he learn from that? A whole lot. Okay. Remember, when he first came in for an interview, he had everything but hay in his hair. He was hay from the state. He was probably the only white male virgin I had ever met. So you know what feedback we gave him? We said, James, number one, go out and get a suit that looks like you didn't get it from the Salvation Army, and get laid. Once those two things happen, you come back for a further interview. Then we'll talk about your potential future with the company. Right? This fellow took feedback phenomenally. He went out and did it, and over the course of his career, he got feedback after feedback after feedback. He is now one of the wealthiest, most effective financial service professionals in the country. He is a phenomenal father, a loving husband, a great citizen, contributes to the community massively, and he's just an amazing human being. And he got it from getting tough feedback throughout his whole career. I can't emphasize this enough. What's missing from the workplace most is a lack of feedback to people on a regular basis on how they impact their peers. You know that when we study people's behavior, people who succeed and people who fail have no idea what their impact is on other people. Successful people that I work with have no idea why they're successful. They just keep doing the same thing, reinventing the wheel all the time. They don't know how to maximize that. And unsuccessful people have no idea why they continually piss off people. Because no one's ever said, you know, being around you is excruciating, it's draining. How often in business and in personal life do you listen to someone drone on and feel like if they don't stop talking, you're going to shoot yourself? You know, it's excruciating. And how often do they get feedback that says, you know, I just asked you about the time, I did not ask you about the history of the watch. And I don't need all that particular detail. So feedback's absolutely essential, critical. There's not enough of it, and it has to be a part of a job interview. And when we interview people, we tell them at the end of the interview whether we're going to recommend moving forward or they're through. And we tell them exactly why. It's criminal what HR people do in telling people that they're not going to move forward at all with them. You know what they tell them? We'll get back to you after we think this is over. Ain't going to get back to them at all. They're finished with them. And it's unprofessional not to tell them that. So we interview people not going to make it. We say, we're not moving forward with you. You do not fit this culture. Right? And they say, well, how come? Because it's painful talking to you. You know? And why would we move you along here? It's very difficult. You know, talking to you is like doing dental surgery. You know? And we're not going to move you along. You know the most interesting thing, I've been doing this a long time, that the candidates who get turned down say when there's a follow-up? So I learned more in this interview than any other interaction in my life. And even though I didn't get the job, I'm glad I did the interview. Because I got a lot of information about who I am. So the interview, absolutely clear. And keep in mind again, we are now in a culture where the ability to access feelings is absolutely essential. This is why, for example, our clients will hire a young woman over a young man 2-to-1. I don't know if you're aware of that. Young women now are prized in most companies. They are more ambitious, harder driving, and they can access their feelings very easily, and they build better relationships. Very interesting thing that's going on in the labor market. Okay, a few more points, and then I'm glad to take your questions. Retention. Why do people stay in companies? It's very interesting when we study this. You know that now salary and benefits are at the bottom of the list. You know what's at the top of the list? A company that walks its talk, that not only talks about its values, but lives them, and an opportunity for personal growth through work. That is, they become better people because they work in your firm. Those are the top 2 things now that feed retention. It's not the typical stuff of, we're going to pay you more. One of the greatest things about young workers now is, you can't give them combat pay to stay in a crappy company. Okay? If it's crappy, they're going to leave. And they're much more mobile than that. And I think it's great. Great development. People won't put up with that. Okay, 2 questions you have to ask in every interview. Number one, as of today's date, what have been the two greatest losses in your life? Absolutely central question. Why is that important? Because core values are developed in the crucible of loss, not in the crucible of gain. You find out what's important to you when you lose someone or something valuable to you. Then your question is, what's really important to me? In that, when people answer that question, they tell you everything you need to know about who they are. Right? Second question, up till today's date, what have been the two most stressful experiences in your life? Follow-up questions, why were they stressful? And what did you learn about you? Understand that the most valuable commodity now in the workplace is self-information, not information about other people or other things. The people who do best at work know themselves the best. They know why they do what they do. So self-information is critical. Those two questions can form the basis for a whole interview. I will often do an interview, and those are the only two questions I ask. Right? And we can talk for 40 minutes about that. And I want to see some feelings. Right? I do not want to get robotic responses, but they're given to me because people think that's what I want to hear. And I've stopped a number of interviews and said, you know, I get the feeling that you're trying to figure out what I want you to say. And the person says, well, yeah. I mean, I want to please you. Say, if you keep that up, the interview's over. I want to know how you feel, not what you think I want to hear. Okay? So I could, as people like the virgins know, I could go on for a long time talking to you about various things. I want to hear how you feel about what I've been talking about. What questions do you have? Yeah, in the back there.
Two quick questions.
Sure.
First, how do you feel about multiple group interviews where you give someone a round robin, say, with 5 interviewers? Second question.
Okay.
What do you think of Admiral Elmo Zumwalt's interview tactics?
I'm not familiar with him.
Well, you sound like him, that's why.
Yeah, I don't know about him, but I love the guy who runs the SEAL program, who did the commencement speech at the University of Texas, you know, how he kicked it off. He said, let me tell you something, folks, kids, there's nothing special about you. So learn how to make your bed in the morning and then you'll have a great day. Now, the first question, repeat this. What do I think about group interviews, numbers of people? Great if they're ready to confront the individuals and not have their colleague rescue them. That's the worst thing about group interviews, is a candidate gets uneasy and sure as hell, someone on the panel steps in and tries to make them feel better. That takes away the whole impetus of the interview. Really interesting point this raises. One of the worst things in the workplace is that people get feedback about what they need to change, and then at the end of the interaction, the person rescues them from being uncomfortable. We call that a shit sandwich. Don't do that to people. You understand that if I tell you that you need to get to the point quicker, and then I say, but you do these 3 things great, what do you leave feeling? I'm great. I'm great. I don't need to pay attention to that critical stuff because you just told me I'm great. Don't take away the power and impact of your feedback. It's the worst thing we do in business. Yeah.
First, thank you. Very enjoyable. When you had said you ignore resumes, you alluded to also reference calls. I'm curious on references, why you find no value, particularly if it's a source that you, the interviewer, know personally, so it's not a blind one that you've been given, but if you have a person who you know and trust, you can get that perspective.
Okay. Great question. Why am I down on references? Yeah. Because people are so freaked out by litigation that they give you a neutral, meaningless reference. You know that one of the greatest suits in employment law is that I didn't get the job because people lied about me in the reference. Okay? And they get lots of money for it. So we have a chill, we put a chill on references with all this litigation. Now, if you know the person, totally, you got a great personal relationship, and you know they'll tell you the absolute truth, go for it. I just find that rare at this point. You understand that employment lawyers have so freaked out HR departments that everyone's afraid to do anything at this point. You know, and I will tell you that if you have HR specialists working for you, you better get the message to them is that their job is to grow people, not to be a repository for victims. Because typical HR training makes them advocates for victims in the company. I do talks to HR groups, and I tell them, you are a vanishing species until you get your act together and understand that your role is development and growth. It's not protecting people from the company. Because that's what we've done to the HR role, and we've perverted it. And it's too bad. There's some very fine people that go into human resources, but they get absolutely intimidated by anal compulsive lawyers. Those just scare the crap out of them. Yeah.
Can you identify a couple companies that you think have transformed and sort of get it and are on a path to developing or unwinding this World War II essentially?
Great question. Are there companies that are on the path to doing it better
Yeah.
than? Very, very few. And the big companies forget about it.
That's legal and compliance,
Pardon?
particularly legal and compliance in the
Yeah.
financial services world have absolutely taken all the oxygen out of the room
Yeah.
to not allow anyone to think freely.
I couldn't agree with you more. I won't do consulting anymore with humongous companies. I've tried it, and it's like working with the federal government. Takes three
Can you give us
people.
one company?
Pardon?
Can you give us one name?
Oh, I'll tell you, certain field offices of the Northwestern Mutual Life do a tremendous job of recruiting good people. Okay? The home office, not because of the home office, let me tell you. The burgers in Milwaukee do not value growth and development. But some of the field offices do a phenomenal job of it. Financial services does the best job of growing people of any industry I've worked with. Okay? Because, why? Because they have no product to sell other than themselves. Okay? Yeah.
Since I buy what you say about, we're hiring people who are capable of hearing disappointment or dealing with disappointment, and at the same time you're saying, constructive criticism is what you have to give those people. Any tips on how to administer that so that you're not doing what you pointed out of, the three things you do well, and here's the one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The question is, how can we give them feedback? Get rid of the word constructive. All criticism is useful. So when I hear constructive, I mean try to make them feel good, regardless of what you say. Your goal in giving people feedback is to upset them. Okay?
That usually leads to turnover.
Yeah. Pardon?
That sometimes leads to turnover. Right?
No, just the opposite. Just the opposite. Good people. This raises a very interesting point. You know what successful people do, the mediocre people don't do? When they are in a situation that's not going well, their first question is, what did I do to set this up to not go well? Okay? Good people know they do some things wrong. The first question mediocre people ask is, who screwed me? So if you give people upsetting feedback and they're good and you want to keep them, they will thank you for it. You understand that we are only disappointed in people that we have high expectations for. If you have no expectations for someone, they can't disappoint you can't go much lower. No, so understand, disappointment is a vote of confidence. This is where we've really screwed children. That if you're not regularly disappointed in your kids, you've abandoned them. I mean this, yeah. If you're not disappointed in a spouse, you've abandoned him or her. Same kind of thing. Relationships require disappointment to grow. And don't back off from it, and don't freak out when you give someone feedback and they get upset. That's good. If they're not upset, why would they do anything any differently? I mean, think about the absurdity of this, that all the positiveness people talk about. That if I get up in the morning and I say, man, I love my job, I love where I live, I'm in the greatest relationships in the world, and I'm gonna make major changes in my life today. Think about the idiocy of that. And yet that palaver is sold to people all the time. Just emphasize the positive, and you'll be fine. It's just pure crap. That's not how we work. Yeah.
That was an interesting statistic you brought up, how you're hiring more young women,
Yeah.
one versus young men. When you look at this room, how do we hire more women to stick in finance and stay in finance?
Oh, how do you hire more women?
I mean, how do we change, I mean, you're seeing the statistics, you're hiring more young women 2-to-1 versus young
Right.
men, right? And if we look at this room, it's mostly men and very few women. So
Uh-huh.
how do we then, translate that to change the numbers in this room? Or in
Well,
this district?
I change it in a number of ways. One of which is we've got to make massive changes in the socialization process of little girls. If you go watch what goes on in a playground, and you'll see the problems we still have. Okay? Young boys fall off an apparatus, and what do we say? Get your ass back up there. Young girls fall off, and we go up and nurture them and act like, oh, this is terrible, how you feeling? Okay? So right from the get-go, we don't treat them equally. So number one, look at how you're parenting little girls. That's one change. And the other is to start challenging women who make trade-offs in their lives and ask them why they're doing that. Okay? Why did they put up with crappy relationships? Okay? We got to start challenging women the way we challenge men, and we'll get more women in the workforce. But we treat them essentially differently, and not to their benefit at all. We do too much caretaking in the socialization of women in our culture. Right? And they're quite capable of taking tough feedback like anyone else is too. But we don't give it to them. And then we wonder why they're not applying for tough jobs. Now the other dilemma we have is young women in a lot of industries now are rocketing up, and then they have to face the fact that they have a husband who's not growing. So, but we see a lot of women turning down promotions to stay with a loser. Yeah. When we are dealing with women who are fast tracking, we call them in for a conference and we say, you need to understand something. You're doing fabulously well. You've got a future here like no other place, but understand this. As your career rockets up, it's going to challenge the most important intimate relationships in your life. Are you ready to do that? Right? Because you can't go jetting around the world as a young woman, meeting people, closing deals, then you go back to your apartment in Manhattan and your hubby's sitting there watching TV, belching and farting. No, something's got to give there. We're very naive about what occupational growth creates in our life. It puts a stress on all the relationships that we're in. So don't be naive about this. Understand that when a company, a firm grows, it creates casualties. And the first casualty is the inaccessibility of leadership. So don't be naive. You want to grow your firm, grow it fast, grow it rapidly. The first thing you'll hear from people is, What the hell happened to me? I got to set up an appointment with you when I used to be able to walk in your office. Yeah, it's a different culture now, a radically different culture. Yeah, got a question?
How concerned are you that the educational institutions that we now have are fostering this culture that we see of creating what I'll term softness in the I deserve generation?
Yeah, the educational institutions. How much time do you have for my?
Not enough.
You teed that one up, man.
Oh man, you don't know how I feel about our schooling in America is an obscenity. It is an absolute obscenity, and it won't change one iota until we remove tenure at every level of the system. Absolutely, tenure is a cancer in our educational system. I was a professor, right? And I saw mediocrity and crappy performance rewarded year after year after year because people were protected by tenure. You know why people want to go from assistant to associate professor? Because at associate professor level, you are completely protected from accountability of any kind whatsoever. Right? It is a friggin' nightmare. Number one, I would retire and close the public school system. It has served its purpose. It was great for the frontier, it was great for immigrants, and it sucks now. All it does now is reward compliance and mediocrity right now. So you worry about your kids' education, you better look at some of the alternatives that have emerged. And there's some great alternatives now. Go on the internet and look up unschooling. It's a whole worldwide movement. And it's a movement that uses the community for teaching children. Right? I think it's a school in Colorado Springs, if I remember right, that takes middle schoolers on a bus from Colorado Springs to New York. That's the semester. The kids are on a bus with a number of faculty members, and you know what their curriculum is? They stop in cities along the way and go to real workplaces and interview people. So you want to know what lawyers do? Stop in a law firm and have lawyers come in and actually tell you what they do. And kids go away thinking, wow, that's not what I thought lawyers do. And every night they write a paper on what they were exposed to during the day. There's a huge movement worldwide that is taking kids out of schools. But right now, I can't fathom why people would want to keep their kids in typical school. Yeah. You know, when people say, why do we have some kids have problems, have school resistance, act out? I'm surprised that any kid can make it through our school system without going nuts. It was boring to me 60 years ago, and it hasn't changed. Bright kids find school horrific and boring, because it is. Okay? And we have faculty that ought to be fired on the spot. Right? And they keep advancing all the time. You know, the typical public school system, you stick it out for 3 years and don't commit a heinous felony, you got a job for life. Think of absurd. How many of you have a guaranteed job for life regardless of your performance? Tell people all the time, do you know how absurd it is? How many people in America have guaranteed jobs, and then look at education. And why do we put up with it? It's crazy. Yeah.
Any view on testing as part of the interviewing, recruiting, personality tests?
Personality tests, psychometric tests are absolutely useless. Get rid of them. Don't waste your money. Right? They might tell you if you're interviewing a potential mass murderer. That's about it. Beyond that, I had to construct them in graduate school. Psychometric tests are like polls. I can get them to show anything I want. Get rid of them, use them. And so many people put their faith in that. We did an interesting study with a major insurance company using psychometric tests and you know, all these tests about how much can you succeed in sales, etc. You know, and then we tracked it for 10 years. You know, we found at the end of 10 years, the people who did best absolutely failed the tests. You know, they had the best performance, bar none. Good. Yeah.
As a tack onto that, your thoughts on standardized tests in schools?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Doesn't prove anything. Yeah. There's no the SATs, people who do the SATs and the ACTs would love to tell you that their scores correlate with success. It's a lie. They do not. There's no more correlation than grade point does. There's no correlation between success and that. And if you have any worries about that or any doubts about that, someone's constructed a list of the most successful businesses in America, led by the most successful people. 90% are college dropouts or never went.
But they do have high IQs.
Oh, they sure have high IQ, yeah. But a lot of people with high IQ are pushing pushing grocery baskets with all their possessions in it too. Yeah. So we've been seduced by this notion that being school smart, academically smart, is some road to success. It's a lie. The most successful people are no smarter than average. That is not why they're successful. They're successful because they know who they are and they hire people who have a lot of self-information. Not because they're bright. Is there a question back there? Yeah.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. One is how to roll out those 2-question interviews at scale. And it just seems like you might catch some candidates that otherwise would have great answers for you off guard. So I'm curious if you're seeing that you need to help candidates coach them to get the best stories out of them, et cetera.
Great question.
And if maybe you preface the interview by making a slightly safer environment than the normal interview, which starts with the resume and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, okay, good. If I'm hearing you right, so what about what possible dangers or difficulties do you create by asking those 2 questions?
You know, how do you get that transition? If you wanted to have those be
Great
the 2
point.
questions we all use, how do we make that transition go more smoothly?
Yeah, I don't want to make it comfortable. I don't want any transition at all. I want it to be abrupt and shocking because I want a spontaneous response. It's a great, great question. Okay, so when I ask people out of the clear blue, what are the greatest losses in your life? And they look dumbfounded, I say, why is that such a difficult question for you? Okay? I want to see how they react to that. You understand what we need in the workforce are people who can transition on a dime and can react to difficult circumstances very quickly and spontaneously. So I don't want it to be safe. Yeah, that's one of these politically correct words. Is this meeting a safe place for me? Oh, come on. Give me a break. That's what snowflakes need, is safety. You know? We're not that fragile. Okay, we're very resilient people, and you raise an interesting point. I want to ask people questions they never prepared to answer. Then I will get the real person at that point. Okay, people tell us all the time is, where do these questions come from? I'm not prepared to answer these questions. Good, that's why we're asking you them. Precisely. Yeah.
The other question I had is a follow-up to the statement earlier that we really need to change the way we're raising our girls. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask whether you put any stock in, I believe it's the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's argument that we actually need to focus on how we're raising our boys to become young men that I think you astutely observed, like World War II and beyond, have created this lack of emotional in touch and that men stop growing and men stop being capable perhaps of rising to the challenges of equality in relationships and things like that. So I'm curious if you put any stock in that notion that it's not just how we're raising our girls, but it's also how we're raising too.
Yeah, or raising our boys. Yeah, you know what's missing in raising our boys is we don't ask them how they feel about their experiences. We ask them what they think. Okay. Very interesting point. When kids come home from school, what do they generally ask? Very interesting.
What'd you do today?
What'd you do today? What'd you do at school? What do they generally say?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
You know why? Because they don't give a shit about what they did. You know what we need to start asking them? How'd you feel about today? Right? And that's where we miss the boat then, and particularly with young boys too. You know, when I deal with my CEO clients, I ask them, how much have you shared your feeling life with your kids? And they give me that deer in the headlights look. What the hell? What do you mean? I mean, have you shared with your sons and daughters how you feel about your work and the difficulties that it poses for you, and how you agonize about certain things? You know what I hear more and more, and I experience this myself? My father died a total mystery to me. I have no idea how that man felt about his life. He was a good provider. He was a caring person. He never told me in his life he loved me or how he felt about me. Right? He wasn't a bad man. He's incapable of accessing his feelings. Right? And it's been a struggle for me with my boys to share that with them. But that's the change we need to make. We need to start asking everybody, particularly young men, how do you feel about your life? And we need to share our feelings with them too. Otherwise, we're just opaque figures in their lives. And that doesn't help them become parents or good workers. It's a real challenge. Pardon?
I asked today how she felt today at school.
Today, yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Today was fine.
He's text messaging his daughter.
No.
My daughter had to ask. I had to ask.
Hey,
Daddy.
You know what's really interesting? When do kids most share their feelings about their life with their parents? What situation, what environment do they feel freest to do that? Shopping with their parents, doing errands with their parents, in a car. It's an environment where they feel free to talk about their feelings. Really interesting.
Right.
It isn't those sit-downs, those horrible sit-downs in the living room. Well, kids, we're going to talk about how you feel about things. You know, it's like they're going to the gas chamber. You know, it's got to be in a more spontaneous environment than that. Any other questions? I know we need to wrap this up, but anything else on your mind? If you have any follow-up questions, Matt and Colby know how to find me. I'd be glad to answer them. And I appreciate your listening and your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.